Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. JACALYN. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. JACALYN at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here at USA Global TV, and also to our friends listening on Business Talk Radio out of New York. I am Dr. JACALYN KERBECK, and our show today is Loving Longevity. And if you're just joining us for the first time, you are in for quite a treat today. We have an incredible guest backstage that was brought to our platform by Annie Bush, who every week is knocking it out of the ballpark. I just have to say that. She brings guests that have such amazing stories that are all relevant to each and every one of us. Today, we're going to look at our topic, which is Unstoppable, a heart transplant's journey. We have Gary Rosenbaum with us here today, and he is a recipient of a heart transplant, and he's going to share a little bit about his story with us today. Before we bring him out, let's welcome Annie. She is a holistic longevity strategist, and she's going to share with us what that means. Welcome back.
Welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Annie Bush. Yes, I'm here to lock my little earbuds out. You can tell we're live. Yes, as a holistic longevity strategist, what I can help you do is have a longevity mindset and not a mortality mindset. We are going to get rid of those ideas about how long we can live, and we are just going to shoot for the stars from now on, and I can help you do that. It's literally getting a second chance. We're not stuck with the way our bodies are right now. Everybody thinks that I'm going to be stuck with this body and it's just going to get older. No, we are going to repair. We're going to regenerate. We're going to renew. And that's kind of what the feeling is about today, is about renewal. And if you've been watching the program, you know how much I love David Schmidt and his developing the LifeWave X39 stem cell activation patches, because activating your stem cells is one way to repair and renew and regenerate your stem cells, which are the cells that go and do the repair job to any organ, any part of your body that's been damaged. And that's where your body's going to get a second chance to extend that longevity. And since today, our theme is kind of a heart-based theme, LifeWave also has a second patch. It's called carnosine. And carnosine is a substance that's actually made in your heart. It's made in your brain. And what it does is it protects the area. Once the X39 goes in and creates it, the carnosine protects your heart, your brain, from oxidative stress, from inflammation. So it's the protector of those organs. And so the theme is second chance today. You too have a second chance to live that life and get healthy, and I can help you do it. And Dr. JACALYN, I just want to make a note right now. Up to this point with all the shows, I've been familiar with the subject matter, so very comfortable. Today, I'm going to be the student and really learn about what's all involved in getting a heart transplant.
Thanks so much, Annie. I'm going to be a student as well, because it's something that's so important. And we hope that we'll never get that news that we need to get a new heart. And we think about the heart, we kind of take it for granted in a lot of ways. It's constantly working to keep us going, keep us moving. I remember when I went for my driver's license and a renewal, and there's that, do you want to be an organ donor? And I always put yes, but people are afraid. It's a simple thing. Check it off and save someone's life. But people don't always do it. And we need more people to donate their organs. We're going to hear more about that. So let's bring out our guest. Gary is with us backstage. He is a heart transplant recipient. He's also a cycling athlete in Transplant Games of America and the World Transplant Games, which I didn't even know that this existed, Annie. So let's bring him out and hear his story. Welcome to the program, Gary.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Hi there. And I would like to start out by giving our audience just a little backstory as to how Gary and I met. I have a dear, dear friend by the name of Donna who lives down the street from Gary.
Correct.
And she told me about him. And the other thing about Donna is she has a very special grandson by the name of Sage. He's now 15 years old, and he is also a heart transplant recipient. So I want to give a shout out to Sage and his mother, Candy, wherever you are, sending best wishes and positive energy to you both. And Sage has been a very unique child in that he's always been in this position. I think he grew up basically in the hospital, or the hospital is like his familiar ground, and the nurses are his friends. And that's basically the existence he's known up to this time, you know, until he got his new heart. But for you, Gary, your story is quite different in that your medical journey didn't start till you were, what, 56 years old?
Correct.
Can you go ahead and tell us about that?
Sure. I was always a pretty healthy individual. In my late 20s, I did have an incident with thyroid cancer, which if you're going to have cancer, thyroid's probably one of the best places to have it. Had my thyroid removed, didn't have to have any other treatment besides taking Synthroid, pretty much to suppress any remaining part of the thyroid. But outside of that, I lived a very healthy life and ran a business, family-run business for almost 30 years. I was pretty successful, sold that business when I turned about 54 and was doing some other things and ended up doing some consulting work with the Maryland Department of Transportation at BWI Airport. And my position involved climbing a lot of stairs. My office was in the terminal building, the lower level of the control tower. And I was tasked with, managing the concession contracts at the airport. And again, that involved walking the corridors and going up steps. And I was starting to have some problems going up the stairs. When I came home and I'd take the garbage out the driveway, we had a fairly long driveway. I'd come back and complain to my wife that I was just extremely tired and short of breath. And based on that, she said, you need to go see your internist. Went to see my internist, and internist immediately transferred me over to a cardiologist. And that began my part of my long journey as a transplant recipient. I'll fill you in a little bit more here. The cardiologist took him a while to try to figure things out, and he sent me to some other specialists. There's a lot of different specialties within cardiology, and they referred me to the Washington Hospital Center, where they did some tests, MRIs and heart caths. And basically, when I was, waking up from one of my heart caths, and I was looking up at all these faces looking down at me, I heard the word heart transplant. So when I was in recovery with my wife, the lead cardiologist basically said I was in severe right side heart failure and that I was going to need a heart transplant. And that's when it hit home that it's on my driver's license, and I had signed up to be a transplant organ donor. And at that point, I realized that there's a reason why people sign up to be organ donors. So that really started my journey, and one thing led to another. I started to see some specialists, and the bottom line is they said, we can keep you going with medications. We're going to put a pacemaker in you. We're going to put a defibrillator in you, and we'll see how long we can keep you going with medications, medical therapy, and also the defibrillator was kind of insurance for me. That if I was to have an episode of a tachycardia, that'd be an arrhythmia of the heart, that it would basically shock me back, to life. So that started my 5-year journey where they said, pretty much within 5 years, you're going to need a transplant. So I got some second opinions, went to the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, and then went back to Hopkins and back to the Washington Hospital Center and receiving my treatments there and follow-ups. But each year, and month by month, I progressively got worse. So I finally reached the point where I needed to see an electrophysiologist that deals with electrical impulses of the heart. And that was in Philadelphia. And he said, I can try to keep you going, but I think you're getting pretty close to needing a transplant. So after seeing him for about a year, it was time that they shifted me over to see the heart transplant team, and met with one of the doctors who is a right side heart failure specialist. And that's where my condition really started, was the right side. Began with an enlargement of the right side of my heart. Pretty much very unusual for someone as young as me to develop a problem on the right side. Usually heart failure begins on the left side of the heart, works its way over to the right side. But in my case, my right side just became very enlarged, and that was creating my problem. Some people might ask, well, what about some mechanical therapy? Unfortunately for right side heart failure, they do not have, and I still believe they do not have one, any kind of artificial heart instead of needing an organ donor. So basically, they told me to get my life in order, went back down to Florida, took care of some things, and then flew back up to Pennsylvania, and met with my right side heart failure specialist. And he took one look at me and says, we're admitting you to the hospital today. So they admitted me to the hospital, and that began my journey of 65 days in the University of Pennsylvania's heart transplant unit. Basically, the first thing they do is start evaluating you to make sure you meet all the right criteria to be in the, to receive a heart. It involved meeting with my wife and my daughter because they're part of my team. They want to make sure that you have a support unit because you can't do this by yourself. It truly takes a village to get through this whole process. It's very complicated. So basically, they're evaluating you for the medications I've been taking, if I can stick to a strict regime of medications. Where would I be recovering? Where would I be living after the transplant? Where do I want to be followed after the transplant? So a bunch of things. So basically, after 2 days of being evaluated, and I'm just lying in my hospital room, the coordinator comes into my room and it says, you made your way onto the list. You're a conditional 1A status. And a conditional status means there's no guarantee, but you're not at the top of the list. And he says, we're presenting it to the UNOS, which is the United Network for Organ Sharing, which is a nationwide organization that coordinates organ procurement from all the local organ procurement organizations. Since we're living here in Florida, a good part of the state is covered by LifeLink of Florida. And that's who I volunteer for now. But up in Philadelphia, it was the Gift of Life program. So I made the list as a conditional. They put it out to the to UNOS, and within 1 week, all the regions voted on it, and I was bumped up to a full 1A status. You can't buy your way onto the list. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't, your economic background, socioeconomic background, none of that matters. So I was pretty fortunate. My only problem was I couldn't leave the hospital because I was in need of therapy. And they had me hooked up to IVs and started administering special drugs to me to keep my heart functioning. So my coordinator said, Gary, things are looking good. 2 weeks, I think you'll have a heart. And having done the research with my wife, and my daughter. The research showed that, even though you're in the hospital, you make your way into the list, there's no guarantees. Any given time in the US, and the numbers might be changing slightly, there's a need for 6,000 people that are on that list for a heart transplant. There might be only 2,500 to 3,000 people that will receive a heart. And basically it boils down to the availability of donor hearts. So when my coordinator said, 2 weeks, we'll have something for you, I, was questioning whether or not this would happen. So the 2 weeks started turning into multiple weeks, and he kept giving me encouragement, but we were there for the long haul. My wife, Susan, an integral part of this whole process, my wife was able to stay at what they call the Transplant House, which is an independent facility, and this one was part of the University of Pennsylvania's hospital, where my wife could stay the whole time I was in the hospital, where she'd have a place to stay. She'd come walk up to the hospital every day, spend a full day with me, but it was a place where she can go back to at the end of the day, be with some other people in the house. There's 12 rooms in the house, and share the story of how I'm doing, and hear the stories how other transplant recipients are doing. I just happened to be the only one that was undergoing a heart transplant at that time. There were other heart and lungs, some stem cells, and liver transplant recipients that were going through the process. But anyway, it just, things were moving along, and it's just, spending time in the hospital. I had a lot of people coming in to see me. Friends would visit me. They drive up, at the time we were living outside of Baltimore, they'd drive up to see me and give me some encouragement. But I'd have other people that had undergone heart transplants that would come into my room and start talking to me, and they'd give me encouragement. And I can fill a little bit more about that as we get into discussions. But there was one person that was very instrumental that really kind of brought me through the whole process. She came into the room. She was dressed in a training outfit that said USA on it, and she was holding a binder that showed a picture of her holding all these medals. Those of you that might remember Mark Spitz, the swimmer from the Olympics, who won like 9 medals around his neck. And she started talking about these transplant games, and she mentioned these world transplant games. And, she's talking, and I'm barely awake, and she's talking to me. And I just said, well, if I survive this process, I'll think about it. And she looked at me and she says, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't talk about, you're going to survive this. And when you survive, after you survive this, you're going to train and you're going to go to these games. And she was pretty powerful with me. And I said, okay. So she was kind of a key player in this in terms of getting me motivated. My heart failure doctor that entered me into the program also had mentioned another fellow who had cancer, and his cancer treatment, he survived the cancer treatment, but it actually destroyed his heart, and he ended up receiving a heart transplant. And he was actually a participant in the Kona Ironman games in Hawaii. And while I was in the hospital on TV, I was actually watching on, I believe it was NBC Sports, watching him participate in these games. And I was blown away by that somebody who went through a heart transplant can still function at the level he was functioning at. All these doctors were generally talking about, the process of getting a heart, but nobody talked about what life is after transplant. So that was another encouraging piece of information to me. There were some other individuals that mentored me, and we can talk about that as we get into it. But anyway, around Thanksgiving, a little bit after Thanksgiving, I got, the nurse came into my room, the night nurse, and says, Gary, we got good news for you. We have a donor heart for you. We feel it's a good match. And they asked me, and they put me in contact with my doctor, Dr. Rami, and I wanted to talk to him because they mentioned that it was a potential high-risk donor heart. So Dr. Rami, he was out of the country at a conference, and he called me back within a couple of minutes, And we started talking, and he said, Gary, yes, it's high risk, but most of your hearts, that'll be available for you might be high risk. And that has to do with any viruses that might be in a donor's heart. But he said the match was good. I think you should go for it. So I said, okay, let's do it. And they started prepping me, but unfortunately, when they went to recover the heart, they made a decision that based on my body chemistry and the condition of the heart and everything, that it was not a match for me. So at that point, I kind of went into some depression over that. And one of the doctors saw a picture of my dog who was hanging right next to my bed. And he said to me, beautiful dog. And I said, sure is. And I never got a chance to tell him where I was going. Well, that doctor made arrangements for my daughter to bring that dog up from Maryland into Philadelphia for me to have the dog come into my room and sit with me for the whole day. And that's what I needed to kind of bring me back to reality. So that kind of kept me going. And lo and behold, kind of got back into another routine of what was going on. I'm on this drug, milrinone, which can kind of keep your heart pumping. It's sometimes kind of what they refer to it as crack cocaine for the heart in terms, it just keeps the heart pumping away in a good way. And time, was progressing, but you can only be on this medication for about 6 months. And after that, your heart just winds down. Well, anyway, Christmas Eve, nurse comes into my room and says, Gary, we have another donor heart for you. Do you want to proceed? And again, they said it's a high-risk donor heart. But without hesitation, I said, let's go. So my wife, who was at the transplant house, we called her up. She came over, got a hold of my daughter, who drove up from Baltimore to be with us. And it was just from there, that's where my whole actual transplant journey going. A lot of thoughts went through my mind the 65 days I was waiting in the hospital. Just a few of the thoughts, and they really hit me hard Christmas Eve when they said, we have the heart for you, is, do I deserve a heart? Somebody just died is going to die for me to receive a heart. What about that person's family, the grief they're going through? Just tons of emotions. And just even think about it, it just gives me the shivers of what was happening at that point in time. So I can kind of let up here a little bit if you want to ask some questions about that, and then talk about as they were wheeling me down. I see Santa Claus in the hallway and people singing Christmas carols. So it was kind of an out-of-body experience at that point in time. But if you want to stop me here, I can answer some questions.
I think Annie and I were in tears a few times during what you shared. Oh my goodness. Well, God bless you. That is so amazing, your journey that you've been through. I was just imagining you lying in that bed for all those days, and then they tell you have the heart, but then you don't have the heart. I can't even imagine what that would have been like. I have a zillion questions, but one question that from what you just said. So just to clarify for our audience, so in order to receive the heart, someone else has to be dying. They can't have already died and they're keeping the heart. It has to be within a certain amount of time. Correct.
What they have to determine brain death, and there's two physicians that have to agree on it. And, it's not a simple process. And there's a lot of misconceptions as far as organ donors and people that have it on their driver's license, because there's a misconception, especially in the minority communities. If someone's in a car accident and they get taken to the hospital, that people think they're going to look at your wallet, see that you're an organ donor, and they're going to stop treating you. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. You receive full medical care. Nobody goes into your wallets. The organ procurement organizations, anybody having to do with organ donation is not even in the picture at that point. Only when someone has gotten to the point where they're on respirators, the heart is going to stop functioning, the lungs are going to stop functioning, and they're basically going to be brain dead. That's when the doctors and nurses reach out to the organ procurement organizations to start doing an evaluation. that's when it gets looked up whether or not the person is on the national registry. And that's when they can start talking to the person's family. There is that misconception that you're not going to receive full medical care. It's a pretty strict regime on what they have to go through for the whole organ donation process. And this has been going on for 40, 50 years. So they got it down. It's a science, and people don't have to be concerned about that.
Thank you for answering that, Annie.
And I have a question. Those 65 days that you were in the hospital, and in addition to the people, the friends, the family that were showing up, like the other heart recipients, to encourage you, is there a program in place that they were providing you with counseling to get you through even that depression that you started feeling along the way? I mean, are they feeding you healthy food? Are they keeping your, I'm looking at this from like a health coach standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What services are they providing to you during that period where you're waiting?
That's a great question. And, I guess I was fortunate with my wife and I being fairly well educated. We were able to, I won't say shop around, but when I had gone to the Cleveland Clinic for a second opinion, I thought that's where I'm going to have my heart transplant based on their reputation with the whole health concept that they do. But it just so happened because the electrophysiologist I was seeing was at the University of Pennsylvania. And we were living in Baltimore, wanted to be close to where my daughter was for recovery, also other family. So we chose the University of Pennsylvania also because of their program and how many heart transplants they do in a given year. So when I got admitted to the program, within those 2 days, we're meeting with nutritionists, the pharmacists, social workers, various doctors and nurses. You have a full medical team working with you. So even had one of my physicians, one of the cardiologists that would do rounds, he saw me and he says, "Gary, you're depressed." And I said, "I don't think so." And he says, "You're depressed. Is it okay? There's someone that I treated 2 years ago that I kind of reminded him of. Is it okay if I call this gentleman and see if he can come in and see you?" And I said, "Sure. What do I have to lose?" So he leaves the room, makes a call. Next thing I know, he walks back in and he says, "I called this gentleman, Bob, and he'll be in touch with you." Well, later that afternoon, Bob shows up in my hospital room. And within 5 minutes, he just calmed me down, got my head screwed on right, just to see someone else that's 2 years out from a transplant, having gone through the same thing I went through and within the same facility. That was so helpful. Also, this woman, her name was Janet Dennis, who helped me with the, she was the World Transplant, person that introduced me to the World Transplant Games. But I had a nutritionist. I was losing weight in the hospital. She was coming in several days a week. The hospital food's not known to be very good.
No.
And the menu changes. Once they have a 5-day schedule, so it was getting pretty old. But because the food was so limited and the doctors wanted me to be healthy, they actually had a refrigerator installed in my room, brought in there, so that my wife could shop for me. Also, the nutritionist can bring in special foods for me. So, I just wasn't limited to what they were serving, through the food service of the hospital. And to tell you, the staff in the hospital is fantastic. From the food service people bringing the food, you get to know these people. The janitorial staff, it was all part of the team. They just made me feel that I was more than just a number in the hospital. So, but mentally and nutritionally, that's all part of the whole process. Recently, I've been mentoring someone. It's part of what I feel I'm paying forward. I've been mentoring someone who just had a transplant this past in August, and where he's had his transplant, it's been a little bit not the same level of information regarding nutrition and stuff, and I've had to encourage him the questions to ask of his medical team to get him on track. So I learned a lot, and just trying to pass that on to other individuals, because it's a scary thing. You don't know, how it's going to end up.
Yeah, and once you get the heart, then you have to know how to take care of it.
Right. And that's why I stopped, in terms of my story. But, my concern initially on was, would I survive the surgery? And my transplant coordinator there initially said, Gary, you don't have to worry about that. He says 99.9% of the people that go through the operation, the whole transplant process, walk away or come off the table. Really what you're dealing with is life after transplant in terms of, recovery in the hospital. And once they set you loose into the real world, your transplant drugs and everything else you have to watch out for. So, that alleviated one of my biggest fears. So, I made it through the surgery fairly well. They had some problems with my lungs, and they were talking palliative care to my wife, which, I didn't know anything about any of this till afterwards. But we made it over that hump and spent about 2 weeks in the hospital in step-down units, cardiac intensive care. And then they eventually wind you down to where, they get you up and walking. And in my case, I actually transitioned to the transplant house because you have to go back to the hospital every couple of days to be evaluated. They want to check on your heart rate. They do some biopsies to make sure you're not doing any rejection, things like that. And so I spent about 2 months in Philadelphia, and then I was able to transition to my daughter's house outside of Baltimore, where I spent several more months until I can enter cardiac rehab. And cardiac rehab is so important to anybody that's had any kind of heart surgery, strokes or whatever. I highly recommend it. Some people blow that off, but it's, initially when I was started out, I said to my wife, I said, they're really not pushing me that hard. And she said, just give it time. Well, they push you. And that got me going. So the first year was a little rough. My donor heart had a virus that I never had. So that's why they consider it a high risk donor heart. It was CMV, a cytomegalovirus. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it's pretty common in a lot of people, but I never had it in my body. A lot of infants develop that virus, and it can cause death fairly quickly. But they were able to treat it. They have drugs to treat it. I was back in the hospital for treatment on that. I went into rejection because of that. Rejections are rated on a 0, 1, 2, and 3. And I was having absolutely no rejections, but then I developed a 1 and a 2. So it got pretty serious. So that's why they wanted me in the hospital. But I was able to fight the virus off. And within a year, I was basically doing fairly good. And I've had some setbacks from time to time. I seem to be, being immunosuppressed, really susceptible to getting the flu, pneumonia, bronchitis, respiratory diseases. But, they have treatments for me. They now have to adjust your immunosuppressive drugs to have you deal with that. And that's why you always remain under the care of your transplant team. Because I was transplanted up in Philadelphia, I transferred all my records down to Tampa General, and they follow me. In fact, I was there just last Thursday to get my 6-month checkup, and they said everything's a-okay. I'm doing good. I'm good for another year, 10,000 miles. So, but it's a continuous journey, and it's one I never dreamed I would be on. When they told me you needed a heart transplant, things that went through my mind is, I was young when Christian Bernard did the first heart transplant in South Africa. That was 50 years ago. And also when they were doing artificial hearts, these Jarvis hearts, and, people were only living a matter of days. But now it's amazing how far they've come along in 50 years. And they pretty much know how to deal with most issues that come up. And if they haven't dealt with it before, they'll try to figure out an answer to it. So,
All right. I think this
yeah.
is a great place that Dr.
Yeah.
JACALYN, if you could pull up that photograph that we have of Gary.
Yes.
And
Let me take this off. Gary, I want to let you know I'm from Philadelphia, and my gastroenterologist is at Penn. They are a great team of people there,
Yeah.
as you know. Look at this picture.
all
Wow.
right. So can we start talking post surgery? You now have your
Sure.
new heart. You're healthy. Now what do you start doing?
Well, after I finished cardiac rehab, and was starting to, do my walking, a little bit of jogging. But when I was staying at my daughter's house, I bought a used bike to get back on because my good bike was down in Florida, and just started biking around. But once I got back down to our home in Florida, 6 months, after transplant, I started biking with my bike club, not going crazy or anything, and just getting myself into shape. And that's when I started looking into the transplant games, what the requirements are. And basically, you have to be 1 year out from transplant before you can participate in the games. So obviously, I missed the summer games the first year, but then I got psyched that I set my goals on the 2017 transplant games that were going to be in Malaga, Spain. And when I was in the hospital, I made my bucket list, and on my bucket list was to travel around the world with my wife and my daughter. So here we're looking at Malaga, Spain coming up in summer 2017, and also going to the transplant games was on the list. So it just fell into place. So I started training. I rode with faster groups in my bike club and did a lot of biking on my own, and was watching what I was eating. Nutrition is pretty important. They certain things they tell you not to do. You got to watch your proteins that are well cooked. If your proteins, like my wife was a vegan for a little bit, but I needed my chicken and some of my beef and stuff. But that stuff has to be well cooked. They don't want you eating any like cold cuts or anything like that. You don't do buffets. A lot of fruits and vegetables. Hydration is critically, and to maintain water intake. And I'm not great with that. I admit it. But that's why I got
your water. Yeah, you got your water
my
there.
water here. So I just felt strong by the time the transplant came around in July of 2017, and we made our way to Spain, and we roomed with a bunch of the Team USA. And let me just mention a couple of things. World Games, it's sponsored by the World Transplant Federation. And the whole idea, the goal of the games is to promote organ donation and healthy living after transplant, to let people know that there is life after transplant. And I met the stories, meeting everybody else in their transplant journey, and hearing the journey, seeing living donors that were attending the games, family of deceased donors being there and hearing their stories. Unbelievable. That was almost, I'd say, it's more important than participating in the cycling events. Just the whole thing was an unreal experience. So the European countries, a lot of countries around the world are training as a team together. The U.S. philosophy is, as long as you're proficient in your sports, you can come to the games. There is money out there to help people that don't have the finances to go to the games. There's some grants and scholarships to do that. So there were from Team USA, there was about 150 athletes, about 1,400 athletes from around the world in about 60 countries. So it's truly, like going to the Olympics. In fact, the national or the International Olympic Committee has recognized the importance of the World Transplant Games, and they're giving them recognition. At some point in time, it may be equivalent to the Paralympics as far as the level of competition and the level of the athletes. I really don't consider myself at an extreme high level, even though I can compete in my sport fairly well. What I learned though, a lot of the folks that were competing were former Olympic athletes, former professional athletes that got a kidney transplant or a liver transplant. Heart transplants in the cycling world at that point in time were very few. I think there were maybe in my age group, the zero. In fact, in the whole cycling event, I think there might have been one other, but I never confirmed that. You know, I got hooked on the games. I finished in the middle of, you know, every event I participated in. So I felt good, and I got hooked on the games. And what I ended up doing is the following year went to the U.S. Games, and these games are held every other year. They alternate between the U.S. Games and the World Games. So I went out to Salt Lake City in 2018, and in the cycling events, I was able to win a gold medal in the 5K time trial. Won a bronze medal in the 20K road race. And I also participated in some track and field events. In race walk, I won a bronze medal in that. So the next US Games are coming up in San Diego this summer, and I'm going there to basically, I forgot the word that they use, but defend my medals.
You're the incumbent.
Yeah, the US Games and World Games, because of COVID, you know, they weren't held the past 2 years. They did virtual stuff, which I participated in, but it's not the same of being with all the other people. That's the highlight of these games. And the whole purpose again is to promote organ donation and transplantation. One organ donor can basically help save 75 lives or contribute. You can save, you know, you got your heart, you have your 2 lungs, your 2 kidneys, your intestines, your liver, the eyes and tissue. Many more people can be saved through all of that.
And can you touch on Anthony and how you got to know Anthony?
Yeah. They encourage you to reach out to your donor family, give it some time, you know, wait 6 months after your transplant to see how you're doing, and to reach out to your family to say thank you. And it's pretty emotional to think about it. When I finally sat down to write my letter, my wife kind of knew I was writing it because she says, "You're really tapping that keyboard pretty hard. You can hear the keyboard clicks." I was pretty intense typing the letter, but I really went through a couple of you know, enumerations of it because I wanted to get the wording right. And my social worker gave me some hints on what to say. So my first letter went out about 6 months after my transplant. It's all anonymous, and it goes through the social worker, who then makes contact through the OPO to the family. And they expect to have, you want to have multiple communications with the family before they release any information, direct information where you can contact that family directly. So I wrote my first letter 6 months out, didn't hear anything, didn't expect to. Another letter a year out, didn't hear anything. Then I was out at the World Games, and I met a family, a donor family from the U.S., a gentleman whose son had died, and his son was an organ donor. And he mentioned to me, he says, "Gary, as a father of someone's son who donated his organs, all I want to hear is thank you. And no, nothing else, just thank you." And that resonated with me. So I really changed the tone of my next letter. And I really, again, kept it simple, thanking the family. And that's what generated some response from the family. So it took about 2 years before I got that response, and we communicated had several letters. Idalia is Anthony's mother. She told me Anthony, you know, was her son, oldest son. She had 2 younger sons, Isaac and Jacob, and that Anthony also had 2 sons, young sons, little Anthony and Chase. And in one of the letters, she told me that little Anthony was having problems with, the death of his father and all that, and asked if I can write to him. And I said, sure, I'll do that. So yeah, I sent the letter to her and also to little Anthony, and she wrote back, thanks so much. It's really helping him. I'd also sent her one of the medallions I received at one of the games I was at, and she says she takes it everywhere with her as a reminder. And she told me that, they sit around the dinner table and talk about me and pray for me all the time. And I just, I choke up about it. She did send me a photo of Anthony, and I just smile when I see him, and I feel like he's looking at me when I see that photo. I talk to him when I ride my bike. I can feel him inside of me beating, and we have a good relationship. And if it wasn't for Anthony and Anthony's family to follow through on him being an organ donor, I might not be here right now. So being an organ donor is very critical. Letting your family know what your wishes are is very important. I thought I was going to have direct contact with Anthony's family, but because of COVID, I know some members of his family have been in and out of the hospital, but the social workers have lost contact with the family. So I've written another letter two letters since then, but I have not heard anything. So I'm not sure if it's going to lead anywhere. But at this point, I can say I feel good. I know Anthony, I know Idalia and the family. So pretty emotional.
That's amazing. That's
incredible
amazing.
Story.
Yeah.
And I think I even read in an interview that feeling him there with you gives you strength, and his strength has now become your strength.
Yeah, it's incredible, and I think how lucky I am. If I ever get depressed, and you do go through periods of time. It's a rough world we're living in now. Just a lot of things going on. You hear about teenage suicides and everything else that's going on. And I consider myself fortunate to have a healthy family. I'm healthy. If I ever get depressed, I think about Anthony and what he's given me. Yeah. And all during COVID. I mean, you throw COVID on top of everything. I was extra careful during all of this. I lost one of my best friends to COVID in February 1st. He said he was being careful, but everybody's idea of being careful is a little different. And unfortunately, vaccines weren't available to him at then. But I've been very strict, very careful, because I'm living my life for two people, myself and Anthony, and even Anthony's family and my family. So I try to do all I can. Was able to receive my second booster shot this past Saturday. They're recommending that for all transplant or immunosuppressed people to get your fourth shot. So it's been emotional. And I might say, just talking about organ donation, there were over 40,000 organ transplants in 2021, a record. So in spite of COVID, organ transplantation has been going on. Right. Florida is almost at 12,000 people on the organ donation registry right now, which is a record. Florida is the third highest state in the country with the number of people registered to be organ donors. So that's incredible that COVID hasn't slowed down the process. It made it more difficult for people. I know, someone goes into the hospital, family can't be with them. So I'm not quite sure how they were handling that with the organ, people getting the actual transplants. But it's incredible that it's still fun. The whole program is functioning the way it is. And, now they have this talking about, there was this emergency use authorization. So University of Maryland's hospital system was able to do a pig heart to a human organ transplant, which initially seemed successful. Unfortunately, the gentleman passed away after 2 months. But there's so much going on in the whole field of organ donation that it's going to change even, 10, 15, 20 years from now. But as far as the immediate future, we need more people to sign up to be organ donors and tissue donors. All major religions, recognize it, and no, they're not against it. The minority populations, they've had some issues thinking, in certain cases, thinking that, again, you're not going to get the care you need at a hospital if you're an organ donor. We always try to dispel that myth when we go out and try to recruit people to be an organ donor. And some of the best or most successful organ transplants are within a minority group, within that minority group. So that's why we need to get more minority groups signed up to be organ donors. I will say my donor was minority. So,
Gary, I think that's a great place to close the show. I'm sorry. I seriously have a whole list of questions, and I would love to have you come back because we didn't, with everything that you've gone through, one area that we didn't even touch on, which is the financial aspect, because that in and of itself, when you were talking about flying here and flying there and the care that you got, I'm interested with our system here in the United States, how that impacted you and your family. Maybe you can come back and share that with us. And just what an amazing story. God bless you. And we're just in awe of what you have shared today. Right, Annie?
And just thank you for educating us on, even after you got the heart transplant, you didn't sit around. You went out, and that second chance of life that you got, you're out there living it. And I think that's the inspiration. And, keeping yourself as healthy as you can so that when something like this happens, you're stronger going into it and you're stronger on the other side of it. And now you got this second chance and you have this whole new life ahead of you.
So thank you for having me. And again, it's all about attitude, and financial resources are out there for most anybody. They can make it happen. So again, just encourage people to be organ donors, and I'm more than happy to, come back again, or people reach out to me. I think my contact information is somewhere on the website. I can give it to people if they want to. I'd be more than happy to talk to people one-on-one, whatever they need. So thanks again. Anthony, thank yous too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Gary, if you want to type in the private chat, the contact information, I'll put it up there before we close out. But thank you so much for coming here, and please do come back and join us again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Annie, I'm going to go over to you because we have to close out. That it's such an emotional story. And I wish we had time to debrief about it, but we've got another show coming up. So
I know.
I'm going to spotlight you. And if you can share how people should reach you and who you'd like to contact you, that would be great.
Yeah, the easiest way to get in touch with me is via my email. It's up there on the screen, yourtotalbody@yahoo.com. And if you're just inspired by Gary's story and just saying, you know what, I'm ready to get my body as healthy as it can be, because you just don't know what's around the corner. So you can get as strong as you can be to be able to face it. And that's what being a health coach, a personal trainer, and a longevity strategist can do for you, is just getting you in your optimal health. And again, these LifeWave patches, I know I talk about them every week, but they are actually using your own body's energy to reflect light that's in these little crystal patches back into your body to stimulate stem cells. And those stem cells are those cells that are going to go and help repair, whatever part of your body that needs repaired, and give you that second chance for your own longevity. We're going to repair your heart. We're going to repair your liver, your kidneys, your skin, your brain. And we're going to do it one patch at a time.
I like that, one patch at a time.
One patch at a time.
Very good. One patch at a time. Okay. Folks, thank you so much for being here. We've got Pet Psychic Amina coming up right after this. So Annie and I will see you next week. Annie, the guest next week, do we have anyone we can announce?
Oh my gosh, it's Ellen Warner. And she is a photographer who traveled around the world photographing women that are in their second half of life. And she's got these amazing stories. I just got the book now. She rushed a copy to me, and the stories of these women across the globe that are in their second half of their stories they have to tell.
Another great guest, Annie. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.